Well, Raven, thank you so much for doing this. We really appreciate it and been wanting to talk to you for a while. What does being recognized with a Pulitzer Prize mean to you? And has it made a difference in your day-to-day life as a composer so far?
Being recognized for the Pulitzer is a complete honor. It was not something I was expecting when I wrote that work. I'm happy that I was awarded. At the same time, it's been quite a trip. It's been the day-to-day workings in the studio have gotten much more complicated in responding to requests and other things, and also just trying to finish work. And at the same time, all of this is aligned with us coming out of the cave of the pandemic, and live music has started again, and I have some gigs on the calendar that I need to get to, and so I'm definitely more busy than I've ever been in my life, but I'm happy to and excited to see what's going to come next.
Voiceless Mass and so much of your work, it grapples with social and political ideas that give added layers of meaning to the music. And I'm wondering, can you talk about your approach to imbuing those ideas in a musical way or a sonic way, even when there might not be text or libretto to accompany it?
It's quite a challenge to do this kind of work of sharing stories and urgent topics through, let's say, instrumental music. At best, one might have an opportunity there with the title or the program notes, but other than that, it's how does one relay what one is expressing, especially if it's something that's trying to bring attention to an issue. So other tactics, the thing that ended up happening with the Voiceless Mass piece is that the instrument that I was composing for is literally connected to a building and an institution, which I am speaking about, which is what I wanted to examine is the Catholic Church's role in the genocide of American Indian people. And so by bringing people into that situation, into the church itself, and again, being able to speak about this through the supplemental notes and the title, and if given an opportunity to also speak through interviews, even on stage, this lets people know that what the issue is that I'm speaking about. And this issue has been something that's been ongoing for 500 years now, and has more and more come to light in Canada and here in the US of that collaboration of the church and residential schools. And so if art can have any kind of insight into that or any kind of commentary, then I'm very appreciative of that ability for it to do that.
So can you talk about what it was like to hear the premiere of Voiceless Mass and, the performances that you've attended and since? How does it change with each iteration, with each performance?
I've seen it performed 3 times so far. The first time I hear any of my works, I'm very honored that by the collaboration with the musicians. So I learn something new every time I hear one of my pieces played, and it's because I think I allow some fluidity and some flexibility in what's being produced, but at the same time, it always becomes a learning experience to hear these sounds being produced in these spaces, and be able to see all the different ways that musicians take on what I have written. And so it does change. In speaking about Voiceless Mass, I think what changes the most is the site specificity of the venue, of the building. And so far this has been performed in 2 different churches and was also done on a more kind of a formal concert stage. And another element of this piece is spreading the performers around the hall. And so each time that happens, there's a different configuration that we work out. There's not a set kind of mapping of where they're supposed to go. I'm open to working that out with the conductor or the ensemble to see what's going to work in the space.
When you were first starting out composing, how did you find collaborators, like performers? How did you find ensembles to perform your music? And has that changed at all over the years?
There was, with the chamber music work that I do, I had studied at Cal Arts, and there's a scene of musicians around that school, and the alumni and other people that are going through those music programs there. And there seems to be a pool of people that you end up collaborating with and getting to know. And I'm happy to say that I've remained friends with a lot of people who've been through that program, composers and performers. And so early on, a lot of my early pieces, they were all performed by Cal Arts faculty, Cal Arts MFA students, and other alumni that were in the LA area. And just bit by bit, others would learn about the music that I was making. And so I've gotten a lot of feedback from other people, a lot of emerging musicians, a lot of students who say, "Oh, I saw your, this score on your website, and I want to play it." And that's been the case since I put those up there. Is that kind of sharing of that. And I appreciate when I also can find scores in the library or where on people's website and study those as well. I get a lot of joy and learning from having that possibility.
So you're the first Native American composer to win a Pulitzer Prize for music. Can you talk about how your heritage has shaped your work on both musical and more conceptual levels?
Yeah, there's not a whole lot of us, so it's nice to have that bit of a addition added on to that title, saying I'm the first Native American composer. But yeah, I mean, it's not the only thing that defines my work at all. Having said that, music and art and filmmaking and any of the other kinds of projects I undertake, they're all opportunities to talk about the history that I know of, the history that happened to Dene people, all the way back to even pre-contact times, talking about the land that I know, the Southwest, and talking about contemporary issues, things like Voiceless Mass is addressing. And so that's where that emerges in my work. If anybody's looking for any kind of modality or Navajo rhythm, they're probably not going to find it in my work. And but what they will find is this this willingness to talk about the issues that I think are important, or talk about the history that they might not be aware of.
Can you talk about a little bit about like the response to your music, and if it's differed depending on the community that you're playing it for? Like, I wonder how I wonder how an audience in a church that's there for a mass would react differently than, I don't know, if you have the opportunity to play your music for other Native peoples.
Yeah, I take on all kinds of gigs. It used to be a little bit more. I'd find myself in some funny situations earlier on in my career. I think people didn't know what they were booking. I mean, it was, again, back to that label of finding out that I come from an indigenous tribe and thinking they're going to end up with a particular kind of music, and they end up with some kind of noise music. And so that led to a lot of funny situations, I think. But it's just a gig. You just do these things and hopefully get paid, sell some merch. But more and more, I think people, I've been doing this for so long. I think people become, and again, back to technology, they can Google, they can find this stuff on Spotify or Bandcamp or whatever, and hear what it is I do. And the hope is that, I'm not trying to dissuade anybody from listening to contemporary music. I'm not trying to, I'm hoping that people find the dissonance that I'm writing, something that they can listen to, even if they have to encounter it bit by bit. And ultimately, my hope is that people just open their ears to the kinds of music that I'm making. But different communities, they all, I'm happy to say they all pretty much react the same way. I think there's that opening of the ears does end up happening, whether it's a young person or it's a maybe older audience who either does or doesn't have familiarity with new music. I think the performances always end with people asking me a lot of questions, and I'm happy to answer those questions. And a lot of those questions just are simply, how did you end up making this kind of music? And so, I go through that story of saying I just kept working at it. I love improvisation. I love composition. I love researching instruments. And this is what has led me to making the music I make today.
Tell us about the Native American Composer Apprenticeship project that you've been involved with for years. What do you do with that project, and why is it important to you to be a part of it?
The Native American Composer Apprentice project is a program that started with the Grand Canyon Music Festival. And the first year of this program was done in the year 2000 with composer Brent Michael Davids. And it was a opportunity for the Grand Canyon Music Festival to reach out to the tribes whose land the Grand Canyon is a part of, and having an opportunity for young people from those communities to compose music. And so what happened is every year, a professional string quartet would come out to the Grand Canyon and put on a concert. And part of that programming would be to have these young composers from the Hopi and Navajo reservations to write new works for that concert. And so my task is to go to these schools, and one of them is in my home community of Chinle, Arizona, where I grew up. I get to go back there and give young musicians the task of writing a composition for string quartet. And so these are very short pieces, 2 to 3 minutes. Sometimes a student writes something longer. And if the student already has familiarity with music notation, that's great. They jump immediately into writing a piece. Otherwise, I have to show them very quickly how to use that language of Western notation to write what they need for the quartet to be able to relay that sound. And so to date, I've been doing this since 2004, and we had a couple down years during COVID, but I think we've taught about 300 young people to write music.
A lot of your work, it has a special relationship with the space where it's being performed. And that might be like the actual history of the space or just acoustics, So if you're talking to a young composer, what aspects of the space might they need to keep in mind when they're writing?
There's a lot of different tactics that I share with students about how to compose or even why to compose. Surely music is an opportunity to express oneself, and it doesn't have to be about anything. It doesn't have to have a message necessarily. It doesn't have to have a narrative. And it can just exist on its own. And if one wants to make that kind of music, there's all kinds of sonic experiments a young person, a young composer can work with. And so working with things like instruments in ways that have never been worked with before, maybe using space or the building, the venue in a new way, is also an idea a young person might have. But I really ask them to consider some of these other parameters of performance and the situation of performance that they might find themselves in. And some of that is back to, for instance, what happened with Voiceless Mass, thinking, okay, well, there is this hugely resonant church that is the venue. But what is the history of this church? Who does this church represent? Who's allowed into this church? Maybe everybody is allowed into this church, but what are the conditions of coming into that space? And who is performing this work? Is the score intended for people who read this Western classical tradition of notation, or is it something that is maybe more open-ended, something more inviting, something more interpretive? Are there men or women on stage, people of color? All of this is something that can be part of the composition. And so I ask students to consider all of those factors, even their own position in all of this. You know, what is their role as composer? What is their background as an artist? How much is collaboration involved in this, and what does that collaboration mean? Is it equitable? Is it the composer maybe dictating what should occur? All of these things are the parameters that I'm interested in working with.
So speaking of which, what do you have coming up aside from the Voiceless Mass, in LA? Anything new on the horizon?
Coming up, there's quite a bit of performances of Voiceless Mass. This is going to happen in quite a few cities all over the country, and a few international performances of this piece. And what's been nice about that is that there's enough room on the concert for older works to resurface. So I'm looking forward to having more of the chamber works performed than I've usually had in past years. And I'm also working on other kinds of visual art and sound art and video art projects coming down the line.
How has being an ASCAP member impacted your music career?
ASCAP has always been supportive of my work, and I've been a member, I think, about 18 years now, and just being available for questions that I have of how one can make a living making chamber music, making instrumental music. It's a complete mystery, and ASCAP has been very helpful in helping me navigate some of that. And just their dedication to concert music, and especially concert music that's on the more kind of experimental side. I usually appreciative of the work that I've been able to do, with them, and the support that they've given. And so I think that's just that's been a huge part of how I work in the studio and keep track of what it is I'm doing, and performances that are happening out there.